Hey guys, Chris here, and I am Ukrainian Canadian. Today is November 22nd, 2024, and let's get to the news and map updates happening in Ukraine and Russia, shall we? So, we're going to cover the map updates, and we're also going to discuss the situations that have occurred in the last few days with Ukrainian military using now Western long range missiles against Russian targets in Russia, and Putin responding and escalating the situation with its own what appears to be intercontinental ballistic missile or hypersonic missile. There's still an investigation ongoing to confirm what type of weapon the Russians used on yesterday. So let's first talk about what occurred Tuesday and Wednesday. You guys, if you saw my video on Tuesday, you remember that Ukraine for the first time used ATACMS to destroy the Russian ammunition depot in Karachev, which is in Bryansk region. According to locals and the videos that we've seen, the Ukrainians were successful in the destruction of the military depot, which is situated just north of the city of Karachev. Additionally, the next day on Wednesday, the Ukrainians were given permission as well by Britain and France to use Storm Shadows and Scalps, the same type of missile, and they used them to strike a very important position not too far away from the front line. Actually, Ukraine could have used the HIMARS systems, but the reason why they used Storm Shadows here and this occurred in Marino because there was an underground facility in the small settlement of Marino between Rilsk and Kurchatov. And so around here, as you can see, this is the city of Marino. The Russians had essentially a facility right here. This is the big, it's sort of a palace area. But the Ukrainians used Storm Shadows because they indeed had an underground facility which would not have been able or it would have been difficult for the Ukrainians to destroy it with typical HIMARS systems. The Storm Shadows are known to be bunker busting missiles, meaning that they have those capabilities of going deep within underground facilities and destroying the facility. There is a confirmation as well, according to certain Western sources, that they were North Korean generals and commanders present during the strike, and one of them was actually critically injured, and a lot of generals and high top Russian officials died after the strike. Ukraine used about 6 or 8 Storm Shadows, so this was an excellent strike. The Ukrainians knew exactly where these commanders were at, and it just shows you guys how pinpoint accurate these Western weapons are, and it's absolutely critical that Ukraine continues to receive them. However, following this, yesterday, we saw the Russian response. Clearly, Russia had to respond. Putin could not just sit idle because everywhere on Russian Voinkor channels, so these are the Telegram channels, and even on state media, they were saying that Russia must respond with strength, right? And of course, Putin isn't going to launch nukes, but he still had to show some force, some strength, because clearly Ukraine has been pushing the Russian red lines. And so what happened yesterday is that Russia launched what appears to be an intercontinental ballistic missile. For the very first time in human history, in any armed conflict, it appears that Russia decided to escalate the situation further. And Putin launched this brand new, as he calls, Oreshnik missile, which hit Dnipro. It thankfully did not have any warheads, so just the pure missile itself, which dropped at a high velocity. And then he came out with a video a few hours later threatening the West and mentioning that essentially it's their fault, that they escalated, that he's not going to permit Ukraine to escalate with the Storm Shadows and ATACMS and other long-range weapons, and that they will pick and choose or they will decide when to strike at any target of their choosing. So Putin again comes out of his bunker, and we know when he does that, the very few times he makes these very short but long speeches at the same time, it's because he's scared and afraid. And it's actually interesting because if you watch the speech that he made yesterday, it's odd because you can see that his hands barely move or don't move at all. His body doesn't move. So it feels like they copied his face onto an image. So I'm not really sure what's going on there, but there's always some really weird stuff whenever Putin comes out with physically, like there's some image and video manipulation going on, editing. So I'm not sure what's going on, but it felt very odd as well. Like where you could see for almost 2 minutes, Putin barely moved his hands. So that was just kind of on a side note. But, again, what Putin wants here is he wants to scare us. And I've mentioned this on my community post yesterday. And he absolutely wants to turn this into global conflict, right? This would be the best casus belli for Putin to rile up the entire Russian population. Like, look, now we're at war with NATO and the United States. They're all engaged in this war and they're threatening us. He really wants this because right now, clearly, he's just fighting with Ukraine. Ukraine is the only one fighting physically against Russia, using its soldiers, using its manpower, its capabilities to defend itself. No other country, NATO and the United States and other countries around the world are doing this. While Russia is bringing North Korean troops, also various troops from all around the world, recruiting Indian troops, mercenaries, African mercenaries. So Zaluzhny actually mentioned this week, which is absolutely true. We're in World War III. Or at the very least, if you don't want to call it World War III, it's a global war now. 100% this is a global war. Russia's involving many countries in this. You have Iran providing missiles and drone technology to Russia, helping them with the factories and the building process of these Shahed drones, which Russia now produces itself. You have China, of course, providing components and even weapons at this stage to Russia. You have North Korea, of course, not only now providing shells and ammunition and weapons, but also now bringing its own troops. There's a first confirmation, actually, there was an image that was shared yesterday of a dead North Korean soldier somewhere in Kursk. Again, it's unconfirmed because we don't have the documents, but clearly you could see kind of the patch of Kim Jong-un. So it would lead us to believe that this would be the first image of a potential North Korean troop soldier. Additionally, they're not just fighting in Kursk. Today, there's even more confirmations that there are North Koreans that are in Kharkiv, generals and also soldiers in Mariupol. So they're all throughout occupied territories in Ukraine now. So you have also another country joining this war against Ukraine. So Zaluzhny is entirely right. We are in a global war at the very least at this stage, and there's no point in hiding it. So Putin wants us to drag the entire world into this conflict. And, my opinion might surprise you about what the reaction or the response should be. And I think that the West should just continue doing what they're doing, right? Just tread carefully at this stage, continue providing Ukraine the weapons and the assistance, and ignore this provocation by Putin. Putin is trying to provoke the West and to get it into an emotional state where, this is unacceptable and we're going to provide more weapons to Ukraine. At the same time, he also wants to show how weak the West is, which is fine. At this stage, we all understand that the strategy by NATO is to boil the frog slowly. They don't want to escalate to the point of, providing Ukraine all the weapons they need, all the long-range missiles, hundreds of them, if not thousands, so Ukraine can just strike whatever they want in Russia. They just want to provide slowly weapons to Ukraine and see what happens. And this is what we saw this week. They were given the permission, likely that Ukraine had received perhaps a delivery of about a dozen or so Storm Shadows and ATACMS. They've used them, and now the West will recalculate what they're going to do next. I hope that they continue providing Ukraine a bare minimum of these long-range missiles, but for sure they're not going to give Ukraine hundreds and hundreds of these missiles. Rather, it's going to be an eventual gradual kind of progression. So this is the strategy that I think the West should employ, not fall into this provocation that Putin is trying to do, because he wants to recreate, in my opinion, a Cuban crisis 2.0, where back in the Soviet Union, it's the Soviet Union that did the step back and actually did the first move and gave in. He wants to see NATO and the United States give in first, if that was to happen. And he's really betting that Trump could be very afraid of this type of escalation, would be willing to just give up Ukraine very quickly, right? So he's going to continue escalating, Putin launching, unfortunately, perhaps in the next few weeks again, these intercontinental missiles or new hypersonic missiles that Russia's been developing, and trying to scare the West and trying to make them step back because, oh, whoa, that's an escalation. Russia's not joking. But just to give you an argument why I don't think with the nuclear bluffing that Putin is doing, it's just a bluff, is because there's no bigger escalation than the operation in Kursk that Ukraine conducted and started in August. Literally, out of all the levels of escalation, there's no bigger one than a foreign nation invading another nation and physically occupying territory. What did we see in the last 3-4 months of this operation? Nothing. Russia didn't strike Ukraine with nuclear weapons. So why should we be fearful that Ukraine was given the permission of using long-range weapons against Russia, Western long-range weapons, that somehow that's it, right? That now Russia's going to start launching nukes against Ukraine. So in my opinion, I think that the Ukrainian occupation of Kursk was a far bigger escalation than the one that occurred this week, with Ukraine getting permission of using Storm Shadows, ATACMS, JSIMs perhaps, and other long-range missiles. So I think that this is clearly bluff. And, what do you guys think about Zaluzhny's comments as well? I'm eager to hear. Do you guys agree that we're now literally in the beginning of the World War III? At the very least, in my opinion, this is a global war. We don't have just Russia and Ukraine involved into this. We have so many different countries. And it's not World War III, in my opinion, in the sense of what we saw previously in the two previous world wars. It's going to be a much more different global conflict. We've seen that Russia and other partners are going to wage war differently, right? It's going to be more of a hybrid war, very mobile. Lots of different operations, whether it be cyber attacks, refugee migrant crises, or cutting underwater sea cables, like what we saw this week. It's still under investigation, but guess what? It's likely Russia that cut these underwater sea cables in the Baltic Sea, close to the Baltics and Sweden, which is still under investigation. But apparently the ship that was very close to these underwater sea cables was actually Chinese, and it came from a port in St. Petersburg. So again, go figure, but I'm pretty sure that this was Russia's doing. So it's not going to be in the sense that we're going to have hundreds of thousands of men battling on a massive front line. It's going to be more of a hybrid component with, even, you remember a few weeks ago, I shared the story of Russia putting incendiary things in airplanes so they could crash in the middle of the flight, right? That's another terrorist operation that Russia was planning. Thankfully, it was foiled, but this is what we're going to be seeing over the next years. And this is why we absolutely need to defeat Russia. So we must maintain course. Of course, we need to tread carefully, understand there's always a possibility of Russia using nuclear weapons. It's an insane nation, an insane society. We've seen their insanity before. But I think that we need to call them out on the bluff, because at the same time, they're fearful, and Putin is very fearful for his life. That's why you're seeing him constantly in his bunker, making these speeches. And as a matter of fact, we're even doubting if it's him himself, right, in those videos when he makes those speeches. Now, just a quick update on the map. So we've talked about the Ukrainian strikes this week in Kursk, in Marino, and also in Karyachev, but there's also a few map changes, mostly in Donbass, which is not favorable for Ukraine, but something that, again, is very minimal in terms of territorial changes. Russia continues to push ahead around the area of Kurakhove and Velika Novosilka. You guys see that it's kind of like a cancer slowly spreading, and something that I've been saying the last few weeks is very likely that Ukraine will have to pull out of Kurakhove and this row of settlements south of Kurakhove. You're seeing that there's Yelazevitka, Romanivka, Hanivka, Uspenivka, Konstantinopolske, Sukheyale, Zelenivka. All these different settlements are likely going to be abandoned by the Ukrainians, and they're going to move to better positions. Unfortunately, that's the situation here, because Russia is now pressuring on different sides from the center, from the west, from the east. There's also a lot of pressure on Kurakhove. Russia also launched a few glide bombs at the thermal power plant that is situated here. So they're putting a lot of pressure, and I'm not anticipating the Ukrainians to be able to hold out for much longer. Likely by end of this month or early December, the Ukrainians will move out to better positions. Additionally, you're seeing that the Russians are putting a lot of pressure more west of Kurakhove, closer to Velika Novosilka, trying to get as close as possible to the border between Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, right? They're not that far away. Again, it's more of a PR for Russia to say that now we're in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, look at us, but at the same time, they're literally at the edge, and barely right now they're barely able to move a few hundred meters per day. So that's the reality of things here. Ukraine absolutely needs to stabilize it. I think that they're going to be able to do it within the winter, but we'll have to see, right? Depends how much more help Russia is also going to get from North Korea, because we're seeing that North Korea is stepping up. They're also providing more artillery systems. There's likely going to be more men, as we've seen. I've said it to you guys, but in Mariupol, there's North Korean generals, North Korean soldiers that have been reported to arrive. in Mariupol. I'm showing Melitopol, but Mariupol is actually here. Also in Kharkiv region, there's claims that there's North Korean troops there. So it also depends on how much Russia is going to receive in terms of help. So there's a lot of things that are at play here, but clearly I do agree with General Zaluzhny, the ex-general of the Ukrainian forces, that we are in World War III. It has officially begun, but it's not going to be the same type of world war that we've seen in the past. It's going to be a much more different war, and we need to be able to be conscious of that and stop pretending like this is just an issue in Ukraine and Russia and we're going to get it done, because there's a lot of actors at play. We don't have just Russia, we have China, Iran, North Korea, and many other actors. They're just waiting to see what happens in Ukraine to start their own little conflicts, globally speaking. So that's the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed my updates. Let me know in the comment section what you think about General Zaluzhny's comments the other day about the situation with Putin escalating with his Oryashnik missile, such a typical Russian name that they gave it. And yeah, thank you again for your support. If you want to help the Ukrainian forces, there is a link below in the description of this video to which you can donate money for the FPV drone program in Ukraine, the Sternenko Rusoriz drone fund. And again, thank you so much for your support for this channel, but also for your support to the Ukrainian cause. It's absolutely necessary. We must be united to defeat this absolute evil that is forming right now and trying to destroy the entire world. Thank you so much. Slava Ukraini.